today's virtual tour and talk with our new collective exhibition. It features the work of Lydia Hamilton Brown, Mashiul Chowdhury, Mary Powers Holt, Susan D'Alessio, and Maria Demoro. So this is how we're going to do it. We're going to do a walkthrough of the installation. So Tina's going to float through with her phone, and each artist will give a brief statement about their work themselves, their influences. And then once we finish that, we're going to turn on the breakout rooms, so you can ask the artists the specific questions about their work. So, usually on a day like this, we have a big reception. Everybody's here, but, under the circumstances, we can't do that for everybody's safety. So we're, happy to do it this way in the meantime. And to point out that we are recording the walkthrough, so we'll be putting it on YouTube at some point for people to see later. And the thing to do during the walkthrough is to pin Tina's videos. So pin the video that says Cerulean Arts, and that'll make it the biggest image on your screen. And now, we're happy to do the virtual opening, but there's, it's only a substitute for seeing the work in person. And we are actually open our regular hours, Wednesday through Friday, 10 to 6, and Saturday, Sunday, 12 to 6. So you're welcome to come. We just ask that you wear a mask when you come. We limit to 10 people at a time, but we usually don't have that many. And we do have a parking lot. We're located at 1355 Ridge Avenue, which is the intersection of Broad, Ridge, and Fairmount in Center City, Philadelphia, just north of Center City. So I think we'll get started. So the first artist we're going to visit with is Maria Demoro. Maria, are you there? Maria?
Yeah, I'm here. I didn't know I had to unmute myself. Okay.
All right. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work?
Sure. I started studying art a little later in life, so I was like 40 when I went to art school. I'll talk mostly about the work. I think you can check my resume out if you're interested in that. So Tina's starting here. A lot of artists work in series. And my exhibition is all drawings. I was trained as a painter, but for the last 15 years, something like that, I've been working primarily in just drawing. So these first drawings you see are part of a series I do of ordinary objects. A lot of them are cleaning rags. A lot of these objects are related to things we do with our hands, particularly things I do with my hands, particularly housework and domestic activities. Yes, Tina can. The second wall of them, another thing I really like to draw is gloves, but that's also related to hands and touch, and these are all work gloves. This is Michael's gloves. This is it's maybe the first set of man's gloves that I drew. A friend of mine, his snow shoveling gloves. This is my garden glove. And also on this wall is a natural form, the hydrangea, and that sort of relates to a different series. So I love drawing objects in a white space with the white paper being the space for the object. And Tina, if you wouldn't mind, from the objects, the second wall I'd want to look at is the dream house, the houses. So I'm still occupied since about 2016 with obsessively drawing objects that I have an emotional attachment to. I'd actually sort of like, well, I can do this one next. These are studies because I was drawing houses, I got interested in the idea of the dream house, dream spaces, and I call these steamscapes, studying steam and clouds, which look really beautiful, but actually most of these are from photographs of industrial pollution. So I like the idea in a drawing of juxtaposing beauty with something. This is almost like beautiful poison, you know, like they're so beautiful, this steam that looks like clouds, but they're actually not very beautiful. That idea of dream versus nightmare, you know, and here's a dust storm too. So I'm just interested in drawing these forms, and in these drawings in the last 2 years, I tried to see if I could use graphite over the whole page as opposed to leaving all that white space. So there was a technical thing I was interested in as well, kind of challenging myself to draw to the whole page with graphite, because graphite I came back to about 4 years ago. This wall is a series of houses I did, and this idea is I tried to do in the past and not too successfully, but finally was able to do some drawings. I'm really interested in the idea of the dream house. I'm an avid watcher of HGTV, and I love to do Zillow for fun. And I read a book when I wrote my thesis in graduate school, The Poetics of Space by Gaston Bachelard, where he talks about us all having this longing for our childhood homes. And it really resonated with me, this idea of where do you really feel at home, because it's not a feeling I always have. So these are pictures of houses. There's one interior and the other are 4 different houses. I'm going to tie this a little bit to it's realism, but sort of more like magic realism. The idea of it's a house, but I wanted things to be a little bit ambiguous in these drawings. And also, again, I'm experimenting with taking graphite over the whole page. And then the 4th subject in this show is nests. Love birds, have always been a backyard bird watcher. I love the nest form. It may seem like it's not related to the other subjects, but it is, because the nest is a home. And in Bachelard's book on the Poetics of Space, he talks about the nest as being a type of a dream house. So I view the nest as being related to the domestic things, but it's also related to storms for me, and clouds, because it is a vortex. And I'm very interested in that bird's eye view of the nest. And so I will continue. I have a collection of nests, and my good friends bring me nests all the time, and it's something I continually draw. I would say the other thing about this is, even though I have these series of ideas that I draw, and I continue with these series, that it's as much about drawing as it is about nests or dream places or domesticity, which is probably the one theme over all of this, is being a woman and kind of domestic issues. But it's also about drawing. It's just a love for drawing, a love for the graphite I've been working with, and just the act of drawing, which is, transformative. That's my bird, Cecil.
Yeah, nobody's here except the 2 of us, so it's all remote. So Maria, you said you have returned to graphite?
Right, because I was trained as a painter, so even in graduate school I was painting, and then I started drawing with ink. I was drawing with some graphite then, but ink, and then I was doing, after post-grad school, I graduated in 2007 with a master's from the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. After that, I was doing mixed media drawings with ink and colored gessos and a lot of brushwork and colored pencils in that, kind of layering the drawings. For some reason, I just, about 4 years ago, said, I wonder what graphite would feel like on paper. And if I took it much farther than you're allowed to take it as a student. When you're a student, you have to produce work, whether it's undergrad or graduate, or you're teaching, you're working fast. So I went back to graphite on paper and just let myself draw as much as I wanted, get as detailed as I wanted, because when you're taught as a painter that detail is the depth of the painting, So I just let myself take as much time as I wanted with the drawing and see what I could do with graphite, and I fell in love with it, because as a material, to me, it's very similar to oil paints. It's, an oil paint you can scrape back and put another layer on, and graphite works the same way. You're always erasing, putting on another layer, but there's a memory to it. Whenever you put a layer, if you erase and put something else on top of it, you always pick up something from that layer underneath. So it's a living material. It was something alive at some point.
So are you using a smooth surface?
Yes. Lately I've been working on museum board because it's really smooth. But I have favorite papers that I use. So I like Stonehenge, and I like these for the artists in the group. I really like that Pescia. Is an Italian paper. It's really white, which I love, and museum board.
So are there artists that you think of when you're doing your work, or?
Yes. Just like I've sort of limited my media, I try to limit, what I'm going for. Probably my favorite artist, the Spanish realists, contemporary Spanish realists, would be my, idols, and that would be Antonio Lopez Garcia. I draw differently than him, but, when I look, his drawings to me are, that's, if I could draw like anybody, that's who I would draw like. I also like, I would look at somebody like Giacometti in terms of how he works space and line, people who use line. But locally, somebody like Ann Minnick, I don't know if you guys know her work,
yes.
There's sculptural paintings, but then she combines these beautiful, beautiful, delicate graphite drawings in with her work. And also locally, Celia Sadlak, I'm not going to pronounce her name right, does these incredible graphite drawings that are, if I could reach that level, I'd be happy.
They also make me think a little bit of Edwin Dickinson.
Oh, interesting.
Because they have that sort of silvery dream quality.
Yeah, I see using I know his drawings very well, like visually, but I'm not sure what the material is, whether it's powdered graphite or charcoal. Mm-hmm. I have a lot more line than Dickinson has.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's more the dreamy quality, and I think a lot of you get that with graphite because it sort of gives the silvery texture. It's
transparent. That's another reason I think it's like oil, because you can do like you would glaze with oil paintings.
Right.
Do like a wash of graphite, and the light comes from underneath.
Yes.
So you get light within the drawing,
Yeah, it approximates the underpainting and glazing process.
Exactly.
Now, yesterday you mentioned an interest in silver point.
Yes.
Do you think that's something you'll undertake?
Possibly. I did it as an undergrad. I used silver point. It's just that it takes a lot to prep the grounds, and you can't erase. Oh, you can erase, but not like you can with graphite. And graphite has that more liquid quality where you can really push it around, But yes, I may someday, because one of my teachers was, actually another one of my drawing teachers is here today, Scott Rollins. I just want to acknowledge him because he was somebody I learned a lot from. His background is science illustration, and there's definitely, I think, like an influence there. But one of my teachers, Dale Roberts, works with silver point still and does these grounds on museum, not museum board, mason wood, mason board.
Like a mason
panel. So I could make drawings that were permanent and take them out from under the glass, which would be nice, to try to do that. But for right now, paper and pencil is enough of a challenge for me.
The gloves really are arresting in a way because there's such a sense of touch in your drawing, and then there's this depiction of a glove which implies a hand, so you're sort of like, there's like this touch.
Well, let's say I do think that drawing drawing is not so much about how you see something, but it is related all to touch. So when you're drawing, you're reaching out, that you're not touching the paper and the pencil, you're touching the object that you're looking at. And, yes, you're right. I'm thinking about the gloves as hand, and also that the gloves, because they're old and worn and used, retain the impression of the person who wore them, so that it kind of has a life of its own, the glove.
Yes, a literal, your hand is there, and this depicted hand, and then I want to take my hand and touch, the drawing. It's a very, very interesting connection.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Maria.
You're welcome.
And we'll carry on to Mary Powers Holt. And we do have some visitors here today. So Mary, are you there?
Hi, everyone. How are you? Thanks for coming. And Tina and Mike, thank you so much for the exhibition. I'm primarily a landscape painter, but I come to landscape from an abstract point of view, looking at large color fields in the sky, shapes, forms. Many, I'd say 13, most of these paintings, or all of the paintings, are from 2019, 2020. I paint one site, I'd say 13 are plein air, and then I continue them in the studio, and some are from photographic references that I also use in the studio. The two that Tina just passed, one was Dawn Redwood and August Afternoon. On this wall, that painting Sky and Lake Reflections is from photographs at Marsh Creek State Park. Boats to the other side of the lake was more or less a pandemic painting to me, painted right at the middle of the beginning of the shutdown. This is a plein air from outside my house, just looking into the sky. It's called Balloons in the Sky. So I found myself this year, especially, painting many more outside. It was just a relief to be outside, just as being in the studio has been a break this year. It's almost like I can take myself away from listening to all the news, sadness. And that's Summer Horizon. The painting below that is 4th of July and full moon fireworks. So this year there was a full moon on the 4th of July, so I started painting outside in the evening and then finished this in the studio. It got very dark. I had a headlamp so I could see. I probably need better gear for painting at night. And this other ellipse is from a painting I did at Marsh State Park as well. That's also a plein air painting. And that was, an afternoon that I spent at the park. It's very close by to us. That painting there is also from Marsh Creek State Park. The same place. I found a good spot to sit right by the water for a few days, and it was very nice to just spend some time there. I think this one was actually from a photographic reference where the sunset was not that dramatic, but I think I painted this around March 16th, right at the beginning of the shutdown. And what I was struck with, I love the boats, the shapes of the boats and the colors. And then I was thinking at the time that, it was very emotional for me. What I thought we were going into here was at the beginning of the pandemic, it was like a vortex of we wouldn't know what would be on the other side of this. At the time, it seemed like it would be what they were saying we'd have be done in a month or two or something, but there's obviously no other side. So I found this one to be, I was more emotional, I think, when I painted that one, and more thinking of the composition. This is a plein air painting from 2019. This is a fall scene, and again, I am very attracted to skies. As an abstract painter, I think skies have always given me a very, I feel like I have endless subject matter, and sometimes I find I just want to see how fast I can capture it. Sometimes it's more challenging than others. This was a scene from my neighbor's house. When I'm walking up the back, I was struck by my neighbor's teenage kids had taken this wood shed and made a whole deck out of it. So it was like this little sitting spot that they made on the hill, probably back in April. So that's what I called it, was the sitting spot, but there was also this very dramatic sky. Hunter's Moon is another night painting of the moon. And Cloud is also another sky painting. Hunter's Moon was, I think that's 2019, at night. It's actually called Hunter's Moon. I can't remember the actual date, but I think that with the phases of the moon, I started getting more interested in each month when you would see that there'd be different names. And then Pink Cloud is also, we get some very dramatic skies where we live. So I do find that lends itself. I love to paint, and I love blending the paints. So I find with the skies that's my main focus. This one is Sky and Lake Reflections from Marsh Creek State Park also. That was at February 2020, and at the time I was thinking, it was probably right before the pandemic. We were hearing more news from China. And then 2 peonies was painted outside in our garden, and the irises were painted. That's irises in a night window. And my father was a gardener and had many types of irises, so that was a tribute to him, and painted right after he passed in 2019. And then peonies, I just spent some time outside in the garden painting our flowers. So yeah, it's been a great release during this time to be able to get outside and do some work, and then also in the studio as well. Probably, I think on the other wall is, let's see, yeah, okay. Yeah, so this is Thistle Evening, and this I painted over I started this over a couple of evenings. The Thistle Weeds are like a big bunch of white furry weeds that grow up on the hill, and they get some really nice light at night. So for the longest time, I wanted to paint those. To me, they looked almost like a crowd in the middle of the hill, and they were there for a little while. I didn't want them mowed down. My husband had some tomatoes growing in the middle to hide them from the deer. So all of that painting too was probably a few days outside, and then the rest I finished in the studio. Forsythia, that was April 2020, I think probably just when the weather was getting better. I've wanted to paint those Forsythia for years. I do paint this tree quite often. This is a shagbark hickory tree that's at the bottom of the field, and it's a really beautiful tree. And then the way the Forsythia were just coming out in the spring, and the way the branches were moving, that I wanted to capture that, and that was also started outside. Smokehouse, the little one is Smokehouse and Black Walnut Hickory Tree, or Black Walnut Tree. We live on a very old farm property, so that's actually, that little smokehouse is probably about 150 years old. It doesn't do anything. I mean, there's like a fireplace out there, and we store some things in there. And then the tree is a really beautiful old tree. I actually started that in 2019 and then went back to it again in 2020. I hadn't finished it. Porch View. This is a view from our front porch where it looks like it should be enclosed, but it has the window there. And I had wanted to paint that for a while, kind of the view of looking out into the sky, of being inside and outside. And at the same time, we have a scythe for taking down weeds and things, and I really liked the curve of the scythe against the wall, the shapes there. So I'm always attracted to abstract shapes and forms in my work. And then this, normally I wouldn't want to paint that, I'd want to move it, but at the time to me it became a symbol of the pandemic, that there's beauty all around, but underneath it all there's a lot of sadness and bad news. So that's the story with that painting. So yeah, I was trained at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. I painted figuratively, then I started working with geometric abstraction. Later, when we moved out to where we live now, I was really struck by the abstract properties of the landscape. And I've been painting landscapes or abstract landscapes for the last 22 years.
So Mary, was it moving to your house and property that stoked your landscape interest?
Yeah. Yes, I just started painting some and then was really struck by it and hooked. So I continued. But I do think I come to it with an abstract kind of feeling to it. I mean, I'm more interested in the color fields, artists that, Turners, skyscapes, landscapes, things, Whistler as well. I've always been interested in some of those painters as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because even though they're representational landscapes, they're not like highly detailed Hudson River type landscape. I mean, you burned out all the detail and reduced things to like shapes and like color shapes.
Right, exactly. Yes, that's more of what I've been interested in. When I was painting geometric abstractions, I used to make a lot of shaped canvases. I cut them out of wood, and some I also made my own stretcher bars and things for those. So I'm always more interested, I think, in blending paint than anything, and I found skies and landscapes really lent itself to that.
And you're using acrylic here. You don't find it more difficult to blend?
No, I don't find acrylics. There are some really good brands that Golden Sommelier have now that I think I don't find them difficult to blend at all. They make more that take longer to dry now. They have some of the open acrylics. There may be some things as far as with oil. You do have to, like I'll do layers. I may start my base painting and then go back later and add more layers of color. And then the next time I get back to it. So it's usually in phases that I work. I will prime my painting with whatever light source I see behind it, usually with one overall color. I use a lot of the interference colors with acrylics and some of the iridescents as well.
What are interference colors?
They'll make like an interference blue. They have an interference blue that's actually, it can give you a glazing effect. And then there's also an iridescent pearl that can give you some bright whites to mix in with I'll mix it with a zinc white or titanium or something so that, because usually there's something in the cloud that's, fading away or has a brightness to the middle of it. So I don't know if I don't have a specific technique that I use for everything, but those are some of the colors that I've discovered recently in the last few years that I've used.
I also wanted to ask you about the depopulated nature of your painting. That is, there's signs of human presence, homes and chairs, but they're like empty chairs.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a dog in Forsythia. That's like once.
Yeah, I think my dog's
in there.
But some of that comes, I thought about that myself, and I think some of that comes from what I found with walking, hiking, painting outside is I find that when I'm alone or doing that, it gives me time to reflect on things that are going on or whatever I want to work on. And there's also the sense that the natural world is always continuing, hopefully. And I guess I started figuratively when I was painting at the Academy, but I have gotten away from that in the landscape.
I mean, I would say that your trees and houses and everything do have personalities. they're living entities in a way, even though there's no people around.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks so much, Mary. It's a great collection of work. Thank you. And next up is Susan D'Alessio. Susan, are you with us, I think?
Here I am.
Excellent.
Do I need to
Will you tell us about your work and yourself?
Sure. What I'm seeing, I'm sorry, everybody. I'm really been having a hard time with this Zoom thing. The Cerulean Gallery show is just pretty much the size of what the figure that everybody else has, right? I mean, what I'm looking at.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I guess we're in my part of the gallery now. The one that everything that's done in this past year has related to the pandemic and the political situation that's been whirling around us and just kind of overwhelming us all, I think, and confusing us. And for a long time, I had a hard time getting into my work, and was not able to get to my studio because I commute about an hour on public transportation, and I was afraid to take public transportation for a long time. So I was renting a car once a week to go, which I didn't really want to do that. But so anyways, I'm working at home, and I'm working on smaller pieces, and then working on larger pieces in my studio when I could get to them. The ones that are being shown now are the smallest ones that I completed and the most recent ones that I completed, mostly done here in the small room in my house. And I think because of all the confusion that was swirling around us, most recently in the last couple of months, these smaller paintings were just very comforting to me. I felt like I needed to shrink my world and go into a really small space. And I got much more precise with the lines and the color than I have been in the past, because I really enjoyed using a ruler and using really precise lines and making everything kind of geometric. And anyway, that was something that was good for me. The background of those paintings is the headlines that were from the New York Times in May 24th, 2020, and it was 3 whole pages filled with just the list of people that had died. And it was, I was very touched by it when I first saw it, and then as I was working on it, every once in a while I'd catch a glimpse of somebody's name, and they would say, they'd say like, Betsy Jones, say, and they would say she loved to sing in the choir, and those little details that just, brought me to tears. So anyway, it was a very emotional kind of work. It was 3 pieces. The ones that you're showing now are street lights, and the background is actually shipping labels from Amazon packages and envelopes. And I live in the city, so whenever I take a walk on trash day, there's lots and lots of cardboard out with labels on them. So I was picking those off, the ones I felt like doing, and then I used that as a background for the brighter street lights and the wire that I have in the right. So I like to work in series. I usually work at least 3 or 4 at a time, because I could work on one, let it dry. I work in acrylic, so it dries very quickly, but sometimes it's good to give it some space, give it a day. This painting is called Democracy in Chains, and this one I looked at my records, I spent the whole year last year working on just this one painting. And obviously I didn't work on it every day, but for me it was very big. It was a big challenge for me, and I really wanted to make a painting this size for as long as my strength and my enthusiasm held up. So this is 82 inches long, and I forget how high it is. Oh, it's 60 inches high. So it did take that whole year to do. I started out, again, at that time we were talking about constitutional issues. Of course, we still are, but it was at a time when there was all this business about the election, 2016, and Trump's relationship to Crimea. So I started out giving my assignment. Oftentimes when I get stuck about where I'm going to do next, I pretend that I'm in school and that my teacher is giving me an assignment. So this assignment was to make a painting that was red, white, and blue. And all the fabrics are from a friend who was a quilt maker. And after she died, her husband gave me all the fabric. I wasn't sure at first whether I wanted to accept all the fabric, because it was essentially about 6 huge garbage bags filled with remnants and bolts of fabric. So, but I finally did. I was able to share it with another artist who was more than glad to get whatever I didn't want. So that worked out very nicely. So I'm still using those fabrics. I can't seem to get away from them. I really am fascinated by them. And Arlene had been a quilt maker, as I said, and so there was really at least 40 years of a collection of fabric. She never threw anything away. So, and I have it all. It's really fun. So that one is also the earlier series that I did. These are the background in this, the light part on these little pieces. I named the title of it is 488, and that's 488 pages of the Mueller report that were reproduced in the newspaper, except that all the dark lines you see were the words and the phrases that were blacked out. So, and I thought the pattern was fascinating, and I loved the idea that the New York Times published essentially a heavily redacted document, and I was amazed by it. So I used that as the background. I've been somewhat obsessed for the last couple of years with cell phone towers and ship loaders, which are those exotic structures that we see when we go past any port. I've seen them from the Pennsylvania Turnpike near Elizabeth, New Jersey. We see them kind of peeking up over the fences, and I've been intrigued by them, so I've been researching them online, and it's been fun. It's amazing, all these different things that they can do. And I just like the image of them. These paintings are a little bit earlier, from an earlier series, and these are the original works that I did that are a tribute to my quilt maker friend Arlene. And again, I set an assignment for myself, and the first one, the one on the right, I said that I was going to make a painting that was all white. So I used just white fabric and layered it, and eventually ended up deciding that just white was pretty boring, and even using a little black was boring, so I did add some green. The one next to it was my red assignment, so I made a collage out of just primarily the red material. And so there's in there those pinks, and there's bright reds, and there's oranges, and there's a little bit of the yellow. At the top is a remnant of a blouse that I dearly loved and began to fall apart, so I've preserved it forever in a collage. There's 3 in this series. I think there's a blue one that I still have, and then there's a green one that was sold. So, not sure what else to say. I tend to work on themes, go for a year or two working on the same theme, and when I feel like I'm losing interest, then I usually latch on to something else. So I like working in subject matter that has a kind of an emotional impact for me, and has a lot of meaning for me, and it helps sustain me as I work on the pieces.
Susan, I was thinking back to your last show, and it was all abstract, I think, for the most part, with the fabrics.
Right.
And, you know, I'm unwrapping things, and all of a sudden there's, like, subject matters coming out.
Yeah.
One after the other. And, you know, it's quite a response, I think, to the current situation.
Yeah. I think it's hard to make strong, say, any kind of political statement when it's totally abstract. I somehow didn't quite know how I was going to do that. And as I said, I was so fascinated with the cell phone towers and the ship loaders, and also the street lights. I decided that I could incorporate that into the idea. So I'm very interested in the relationship of what's part of the discussion has been about the importance of human life versus the importance of keeping the economy going. And so that is a part of some of these smaller pieces, particularly where like the cell phone tower to me represents, you know, the economy, and especially with the ship loaders, the smaller paintings with the ship loaders, you know, it was a decision to keep the economy going, and then having behind it the page from the New York Times.
Yeah, those ones especially, you know, they're very small and intimate, so you have to get close.
Yeah, right.
And at first you don't know what's going on. You see, like, the geometric angular shape of the ship loader, now that you've explained what that is. And then you see the Times, you know, obituary.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you just feel like completely heartbroken.
Yeah.
It's this reality check that comes back, you know, that kind of keeps coming back.
Right, because even this morning, I don't know how many people are dead now, certainly well over 200,000, right? And somehow those numbers still seem so meaningless. We were horrified when it was 100,000, and that's when that newspaper was published, May 24th. So it just seems like that list helped me kind of get a sense of each individual's lives. You know, one person that used to play with his children, he was a grandfather, loved to play with his grandkids, that kind of thing, very, very emotional. One thing that I was aware of, I had been a jeweler for 40 years. And one of the things, as I was working very close at my small table here at the home, I reminded myself of when I was a jeweler, hunched over a jewelry bench. And that was a period in my life where everything was just very centered on this small object and creating small objects. And I even worked with a magnifier, one of those helmets that dentists and ophthalmologists wear, you know, to see close. So I worked, you know, almost did everything, especially as I got older and my sight wasn't as good as it had been. I used the magnifier, so that's really getting pretty close. Everything is brought down to millimeters. Forget the inches, down to millimeters. So very small.
So were you active as a jewelry maker when you decided to attend the academy? How was that transition?
I had, at the later part of my jewelry career, I had started getting frustrated with just making pretty things, because that's what jewelry is supposed to be, you know, it's supposed to be pretty. And I started going into, at first I have a 9/11 happened, September 11th, 2001. Yeah. And I was at my workbench making a gold necklace with an opal, and I was enjoying it. But I'm thinking, what am I doing? You know, there's just this horrible, horrible thing has just happened that's filling the news and filling the papers. And I started looking at the images and realized that as horrible as it was, there was some real beauty in the actual impact of the planes onto the buildings. I know that sounds terrible, and I was actually even afraid to talk about it for a while. But I made these pins. I made pins and I made necklaces and that was the subject matter, was the planes were made out of ebony, and the buildings that were toppling were in silver. And so I carried that through for a while, and then later I went to Baghdad and started making imageries of when we were bombing Baghdad. And after that I thought, where am I going? And I just, one day I was walking down the street and I thought, I'm done here. I'm not going to be a jeweler anymore. I've always wanted to be a painter, and I think this is now this time. So, like 2 days later, I ran into a friend that had gone to art school, someone that was, a mature student, and he'd just gotten out. And I said, John, where should I go to art school? And he says, well, at the academy, of course. So anyway, ended up there.
Well, thank you so much, Susan. It's a great group of works.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now we're heading into Lydia Hamilton Brown's room, which is probably the wildest room of the bunch. So, Lydia, are you there?
I'm here. Yes, I am.
Yes. Can you tell us a story?
Well, I can tell you the story. This actually comes about from last year, the show I had, which was all about a trip to Coney Island, a kind of a fantasy trip that I took, and about the events that occurred during that imaginary trip. And during that time, I did a typewritten story, which everyone seemed to enjoy. And so I thought, well, I'm going to continue on with that, and I'm going to now introduce you to the characters. In that original story, I actually went to Coney Island with my little characters. And we were sitting on the beach, and I had the grandma and the storyteller with me, and grandma got washed to sea. So in that story, all the characters that lived on Coney Island, which you see in this drawing, came rushing to her aid as she floated back from the water. And they had oxygen, and they had all kinds of gadgets that they would use to revive her, and some of them were singing and playing instruments. And I decided this year I would not only introduce you to the figures, but show you exactly where they live and what they do. So you see the guard, you see the sword swallower, you see the fellow that throws the knives. He's blindfolded, which is kind of ironic. And the strong man, you have the conductor's wife with her little guitar. And then you have Nails, who he's just kind of a strange character that lives in the bushes. The little trombone player actually did make a trip to Coney Island. And then there's the conductor. The conductor I'll tell you about later because he plays a very important part in the story. As do the mourners. We have the holy people, the religious people. They will play a part in the story as well. Down there is the little fellow with the oxygen that came rushing to the aid of grandma as she was washed again to the shore. The mourners appear because some people assumed that grandma died that day, so we had mourners arrive, but fortunately, she did not die. She's still around for a while. There's the Pathetico, the puppeteer, and behind him is the two-headed figures that called these lifesavers, and they're called the lifesavers because they have their oxygen with them to revive grandma. The Rocket Girl, which is in that same grouping there, the Rocket Girl is going to play an important part as we move into the third part of the story. I'll tell you a little bit about that when we get to the photographs. We have the cart, there we have the alligator mourner and the saxophone priest. Why I choose alligators is kind of an unusual story. I had a little rubber alligator when I was a child, and I used to throw it out in the water and it would come floating back in, and people would run screaming and yelling, and I always thought that was great fun. So I kind of always had an alligator in the back of my mind. That is the cart, and in the cart is the leader of the parade, which will be the welcoming of the statue of Grandma when we get further down to the story. And we have the piper, and we have the opera singer. The opera singer took a trip to Coney Island with me one day. She did not go out to sea. And then further down, we have the Horatio, who's playing all kinds of interesting instruments, as well as bagpipes, which were made from wooden keys from her piano, and a holy person and the lute player. And if we go down to that figure right there, he's an important part of the story because he is the mystic button man. The mystic button man actually is the little storyteller from last year's story. He goes back to Coney Island to search out these figures that he wants to thank, and he brings them gifts, and he finds that they're all gone. So if we could go over to the photographs, what I did was, in this exhibition, I've actually incorporated almost every art form I know how to do. There's sculpture, found materials, photography, as well as the drawing. Now, these photographs I take are not Photoshop. These are exactly as they go into the camera, and I photograph them. I take thousands of photographs. And what I did was I created a place for these characters to live. They live in my basement. I know Mike's probably just fainted there because I'm always telling these nutty stories. I created what's called an assemblage. It measures 15 feet long, 8 feet high, and comes out from the wall 4 feet. Then I put the characters within this construction, and I photograph them. I photograph him doing all the things they do, because what happened is, after the incident with Grandma, things changed, the world changed, and they all had to leave Coney Island, and they left as a group. And they came upon this dilapidated old ruin of a building, and it's called the Asylum of Slumberland. So this painting right there, or photograph right there, shows how they arrived at Slumberland on a rainy, rainy night, and that's the mermaid and Mystic Button Man. The next one over again is a photograph with no Photoshop, no editing at all, and this is the leader of the parade, and he's climbing up a set of stairs, and if you noticed, I used cardboard inserts and other things in this assemblage that I built. Everything is lit with LEDs and no natural lighting. This is the sword swallower, and she, of course, escaped along with some of the others to live down in the Slumberland. And next is, this is Esther. And the original sculpture is not in the exhibition, but I happen to like her. She's a mermaid, and her name is Esther, E-S-T-E-R. And I haven't quite completed what her journey is going to be or what her participation in the story will be. However, I liked her. I liked the way the colors played upon her umbrella that she carried, and you saw her as she was arriving at the asylum. Now, I have to correct the word asylum. It's only because that is what it was called. They're not crazy or anything like that. The other thing that I used in the one before that, if we can go back to the arrival picture, I went to, let's see if we can get back there. I went to the hospital of Ellis Island and took a lot of slides. So when I was downstairs photographing the asylum, I projected the slides of Ellis Island to give it the look of a rundown hospital. So we have that one right there. And if you see the door and the entrance and the stairway, this is actually the entrance and the stairway of the hospital of Ellis Island. And then I place the figures in front of them and shoot the photograph. So it's a very, very complicated process, but I enjoy it because it gives the characters life. because as they stand there, you look at them as sculpture and characters, but they're actually part of the story. And what they do, they are in the, okay, we can go to the drawing now. The drawing is all the characters and the residents of Slumberland. Now this small piece, I wanted to come up with an idea of costumes that would not be something that you would recognize, something you would say, oh yeah, that looks like a character from Coney Island or whatever. I wanted them to have their own individual appearance. So I went over to the Perlman Gallery where they were having the exhibition on costumes. And I sat and I drew every costume in the exhibition. And then when I came home, I was able to incorporate those costumes into what you see as these characters. So they're different and yet they're similar. They give a certain flamboyance to them, a certain color. Obviously, I love color. It's very important to everything I do. And let's see where we're going now. Okay, these are depicting the parade. Where the parade is going to come in is the storyteller is going to return to Coney Island and try to find his friends. And he's packed all kinds of interesting things for them. He wants to give them gifts, and he goes on a journey to search for them. I actually take these journeys myself. I go to Coney Island, I take the bus, and I write down all the different signs and signals. I go to restaurants, and all these things that I experience are incorporated in this story. So, for example, this cart, which is going to welcome the statue of Grandma that's going to be erected at Slumberland, I saw this smashed up cart on the streets in Brighton Beach. And I just make notes of it. I don't sketch as much on the streets as I do just take notes. And I ride the bus to Brighton Beach. And one of the restaurants I went ended up being the place that the storyteller is going to find a link to finding his friends. So this is kind of like just fun circus kind of thing, because we're going to have this exciting parade take place. And these are some of the holy characters that are going to lead the parade. So where we stand now with this story, here again are the parade. These are watercolor mixed media. I also used what's called flash paint. Flash paint is an acrylic-based paint, but what I like about it is that every color is the same price. If you want a red, you pay the same as you're going to pay for blue. And being a tad careless, I tend to leave caps off and jars open. So it's good to have a little economical spin. This I particularly like because you see this strange character who's got kind of part snake, part wolf, carrying these little creatures to the parade to see what's going to happen. And each event that occurs that makes it even more kind of fun for me is that I collect vintage typewriters. So last year when I did the exhibition, I typed the story of Grandma and her trip to Coney Island, and I came to find out that more people enjoyed this crazy story than they did actually looking at the figures, because they could relate to the silly stuff that these people were going to do. So we have the next part. The first is the Coney Island trip. Now we have the Mystic Button Man going back. He's not the Mystic Button Man until the end of the story, because what he's going to do is he's going to travel. He finds a way of learning perhaps these characters are around. So he's going to go on a journey, and as he goes on his journey to find them at the asylum, he picks up buttons and he glues them to his coat. And he continues to glue them to his coat until he reaches his destination. And if you look again at the figure, you'll see his coat is covered with buttons. And I did a piece that he sits in where you can actually have a make-believe sort of microphone, and you can give him a wish and he will give you a button. And if you get that button, your wish will come true because he's the mystic button man. What can I say? So what's going to happen as these characters live in their little asylum is there's going to be some sort of a catastrophe. I don't know yet what the catastrophe is going to be, but some of them will survive and some of them won't. That's part of the surprise. The good part is you'll see that the Rocket Girl is well equipped to take them away from where they are now. So for those that survive, the Rocket Girl is going to be there to save them. So that's pretty much everything about the trip to Coney Island.
So Lydia, when you visit the gallery and we talk to you, you sort of toggle back and forth between day-to-day business and your story, like seamlessly. Like you'll start talking about grandma and such. I mean, can you talk about that? Like how you got to this point, like how this became such a thing for you.
Okay, well, what happened was I've always been fascinated by the circus sideshow. My mom took me to Madison Square Garden when I was a little girl, and I'll never forget seeing the giant and all these strange creatures. And I was fascinated by storybook land and all these places that are in your imagination. And I decided to take a couple of the characters with me to Coney Island. And one of them was just a small figure in a doll dress with the head of an alligator. And the other one was a legless little character. And they were on the beach, and we were on the beach, and we were sitting there. And the next thing I know, a wave comes over us and sweeps them out to sea. And I stood there, and I was like so upset because I just was going up there to photograph this little character, and all of a sudden she came back. She came bouncing back like this little toy alligator I had as a child. I could see her little red feet bobbing in the waves, and as she came back and landed on the shore, I thought to myself, we have a story here. It's a story that I want to tell. And I came home and I started writing the story on the typewriter. And as I wrote the story and began to create these characters, they actually came to life. And now I know that sounds a little crazy, but that's what happened. And my imagination gets away from me at times because I can literally see these characters doing these things, and it just took a life of its own. And that's where we ended up. So that's why I felt I had to find a place for them to live.
So do you feel your time at Academy, you went through 2 programs.
Actually 3.
3 equipped you to handle all the various materials that you use, the constructions, or did you have to figure a lot of this out just on your own?
My first go round at the Academy was when I was a certificate student some years ago. And I think what I learned the most there, without minimalizing, was composition and how to put something together, how to put a painting together, a photograph together. At that time, I was a painter, and my paintings were gigantic. They were huge. My second trip back was when I got my master's, and I went through the program there. It was more about observation, observing and seeing what else is going on, and how can I put all of this experience together in one pot and make it my own. I have to admit I got tired of painting. I just felt that painting for me was not doing anything. And my imagination, I would do these things on my own. And I hate to use this person, but Stuart Shills came in my studio one day and he said, "That is incredible. That's fabulous." It was a small doll I had made out of paper mache. And he went on and on about how fabulous this was. And I decided, maybe I'll make these things. So I made a lot from paper mache, a lot from cooties, experimenting with and as you well know, how to stabilize these characters without making them look like sculpture and frozen. I want them to look like they're sort of alive. So I always will have a fondness for PAFA. It's where I started my art career and basically where I ended my education. So I have probably 8 years worth of PAFA under my belt, which is something to be proud of, I think.
Well, it looks great, Lydia. Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much. So now we're heading towards Mashiul's room. Mashiul, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Tell us a bit about yourself and your work and such.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to be with all of you. And first of all, thanks to Mike and Tina for, arranging this show. And it's a different time and technology. And so far, it's been going pretty well. And it's been fascinating to listen stories of, Lydia and Maria, Mary, and Susan. It's, wonderful, and I'm really humbled and honored by by this great artist. It's amazing to hear all of you that how much we share with each other, the techniques, the thoughts, and ideas behind it. So, just briefly, I've been painting for almost 15, 20 years, and this is one of the several shows happening in Cerulean. I've been, interested in doing landscape, urban landscape. I grew in Dhaka, Bangladesh, just the opposite part of this world. And I love the chaotic, but some orderly fashion of urban life. Its geometry, its shape and form that I grew up with. And I've been working with several medias actually, photography, painting, drawing, but painting is in my heart, and I use photograph as a reference. Coming to Philadelphia about more than 30 years ago, I find a relationship with the environment that my childhood was, and here. So my painting is actually small sizes. The largest one probably would be like 12 by 12 inch. But I actually work on several pieces at the same time. If you come to my studio, you'll see that I have about 20 to 30 pieces going on at the same time. So that's the advantage of working in a small pieces. The work I do every single day, that's going back and forth, I see the images around me. And I pull my car and, I do the sketches and take photos. This particular one this particular one and the other one that Tina just showed, these are images from North Philly. It's around Castor Avenue, Torresdale Avenue. I love the way that the light actually goes on, and I try to minimize the forms and the other shapes and try to focus on something. And you can see that I work on layers. This particular image I actually took a photo from when driving on the 995, and this is Kensington Avenue. I never recommend anyone to do that. It's not safe. But you try. When I see images, I can't help it actually. This particular one is from Norristown. You can imagine that there are a lot of other buildings and things going on, but I try to simplify and minimize things. This one in Torresdale Avenue It's in North Philadelphia again. My work is actually semi-abstract, you can say. I focus on the shapes mainly, and the sky that, it's never yellow like this. But, I try not to focus on what image I actually see. What actually my heart says, that's what I always feel, and that's the way I work. These are the things, something that I did on around Valley Forge. You can see that this is something not exactly my interest. As I said, it's urban landscape and the geometry and shape. But when I go to those places, the Valley Forge, Lancaster, for example, I see those images. There is some relationship between the urbanization and the rural areas, or and the nature, basically landscape. So again, these bushes and the foliages are very much simplified. So these three images actually are very small, 6 by 6 inches, and this particular one is around Mannion, and the other one from different part of the city, Philadelphia city. So if you look at my paintings and the images, 90% would be from Philadelphia, and that's the thing I see every single day, and that's the experience I have. So these images are abstraction. It's little more than others, and as you can imagine, that these images are not really produced or done in one sitting. I do plein air, inside my car or going outside my car. But most of these paintings are done in the studio. In the beginning, when you saw some images under the glasses, those are plein air mostly. The image that you saw just before, that was from Lancaster, and this is again different part of Philadelphia city. I don't exactly paint the area of the buildings or that I see. I alter. So major part of the image probably from the particular area. The thing that I actually always challenge, that I have no problem of painting all day and night and months and years, but when it comes to title it, I challenge. It's just a most challenging part of my painting story. So I try to memorize the street, and that's the way I title it. As you know, as an artist, title is probably the least important thing of any painting. Again, this is from Philadelphia. This was actually plein air. And one thing I need to tell you that, most of them are done on paper, and then, mounted on masonite board. That's how I work. I find paper actually very flexible to work with. I do a lot of scratching, marking, mark making. I sand out a lot of sanding, and when you sand, obviously you create a texture, and then I let it dry and pretty much bone dry, and I put a paint layer again on top of what I did. Earlier, I think Maria was telling about this layering and how the one layer can actually support the other layers, and it's a memory that you can actually see. This is an interesting painting actually. You can see I put a masking tape and I do something like interesting things sometimes. I thought it actually brought the monotonous, the surface of the painting. And one thing also you notice that I also use graphite and charcoal on the paint. That helps me in creating forms, and also sometimes I use numbers, in the painting. So again, this is one of the areas in Philadelphia. You can see the markings and the pencil and the charcoal on top of the paint. So these are all the boards that actually I paste my paper after it's done, and then I frame it. This is something from Lancaster, and I did the semi-abstraction of the landscape and minimize, and it's basically you can see that the it's how much information you actually need for the painting. So I try to eliminate most of the information and try to focus on very minimum thing that actually excite me. So that's the way I work now. One thing I have to tell you that I couldn't do this work actually if I was not doing a drawing. And all these paintings are really based on lots of drawing. I obsessively draw on a sketchbook every single day. And I've been going to Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, the alumni drawing session, which Mike actually introduced me about 20 years ago. And I attend there, I do figure drawing, and that helps me in making a line which is actually musical. The line can tell its story. So all this work, I'm really wanted to emphasize that because I obsessively draw, and that's why I can paint. And one other thing that I have to also tell you that, like I said earlier, the photograph is actually another thing that I do. Photographs of texture, photographs of the wall, sidewalk, images, abstract images, and those things actually help me in this process. I don't recreate those photographs, but I take information from those photographs and try to apply in my painting. So that's pretty much the story of my painting.
So Mashiul, you mentioned before that sometimes you would paint like out of the back of your car in some of these locations. Are you
correct?
Doing that?
Yes. Well, I work I'm a physician by profession actually. So my daytime job is going to work back and forth. I try to hide my other profession because this is nothing to do with my painting. But I'm blessed by having the workplace where you go through the North Philadelphia, and I find those irregularities and the images that actually fascinate me. I think it's with the gentrification we're losing that, but the North Philly is still retaining those images. So what I do is basically it's usually not very safe in some of the area working outside. So I close my door, and I have always I always say that I have my second studio is my car actually. So I pull up my sketchbook and papers, and I do paintings inside my car. Yes.
So do you bring your paint too, or are you just drawing out there?
Yeah. So I actually bring a lot of sketchbook with me. This sketchbook. So those are small sketchbooks that I work on. I bring them in my studio, And some of the plein air that you saw initially, the painting that under the glass, so those are done inside the car. I don't alter and do anything. I go back to that place again to do the second layer or third layer. But I take a lot of photos. I do a lot of preliminary sketches. Those things actually I apply when I come back to the studio and do my studio work. And those studio work is actually it's just the opposite. It can take from 3 months to a year, but I never stop working on one piece.
So the color and texture is interesting. I mean, are you like inspired by the color of the location, or are you like, how do you get there?
I'm glad that you asked me. Actually, I've been asking myself. I'm not conscious about when I work actually about the color. I use those colors whatever my heart says. But then I've been asking myself actually that how did this orange and the red and yellow come? I think when I grew up in India and Bangladesh, I think I have this in these colors inside me. That's what I think. But I've been working here for past 20 to 25 years. I think those things is still inside me, and it comes just spontaneously, those colors.
I mean, your work also has a very textural quality. I mean, it's thick and thin. And, so as you work in the studio, like more methodically, I mean, does it sort of change from an image to an object for you? Like, or do you want it to have an appealing texture as well?
Correct. So these images, for example, are plein air done inside my car. These things also has a layer, but not as much as layers in the studio actually. So, when I work inside my studio, I may start with an image, a form, and end up with totally different one. It really depends on how the work goes actually. I mean, sometimes I don't know when to stop, where to stop, but at some point, I feel like, it's probably done. That actually creates a lot of textures and I feel like more layers I do, and scratching and the, sanding, I feel more satisfied, because, if I go to city and the photograph that I do on the wall or street, these things are happening spontaneously, those markings and colors and everything. So in just one layer of paint may not do the justice. So when I actually create these textures, more and more, a lot of scratching and things like that, I feel like, I am getting there. I can express what the city actually tells me. I don't know if I answered your question.
Oh, yes, yeah. I mean, I think the back and forth, the applying and scraping, and applying, I mean, it starts to have a felt response, to the.
Yeah, that's what I feel always. These techniques that I, never seen, I have never followed anything anywhere. I didn't take any courses or anything, but this is something that I developed on my own. And I see that a lot of artists do that too. I'm very much fascinated with a lot of artists, de Kooning and, Basquiat and, more recently that, I saw James Howard in your Cerulean Gallery, his work. And Stuart Shields, one of my favorite too. So, those things actually, I'm influenced by a lot of artists and some tapis in Spain. So their work. So yeah, I have my own techniques, and I don't know if I can tell about this the workshop that I have in December. That has probably still some few spots there. If anyone interested to see my techniques, I will be happy to share. I can register for that workshop.
Yes, the Mashiul's workshop is on the website. You can have a look at that. Well, thanks so much, Mashiul.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you to all the artists for the walkthrough. It's great to hear you speak about your work. It's